Well, those are 5 world-class presentations, and we thank you very, very much. And I think it's important to just acknowledge the consistency, although there were some different approaches, the overall consistency in terms of the percentages of carriers, and again, underscoring the importance of family health history, although that's complicated, as mentioned by many of the authors, but also underscoring the tremendous importance of understanding what else is going on for the vast majority of cases that are microsatellite stable. So we're in the home stretch, and so we think we're going to make it, especially if I get on with it. So Dr. Yin Cao, you saw earlier today one of the presentations mentioned a beautiful JAMA oncology study about the nurses' health study and colorectal cancer. And it just so happens that Dr. Cao is the lead author of that paper. And when I wrote to her, she wrote back in like 3 seconds and said, yes, we will come and we will talk about our work. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Yin Cao, who's made a big trip from Washington University School of Medicine, and we look forward to her thoughts on novel factors affecting young adult colorectal cancer.
Hi, everyone. I think it's a good time to say good evening. Thank you so much for staying with us. And thank you so much for Dr. Weber for your introduction and also invitation to speak to this world-class audience and faculty. I'm not world-class yet, but I hope I can be. I'm so excited to work on this exciting topic with world-leading cancer epidemiologists. And today I'll introduce our work on obesity, sedentary behavior, and early onset colorectal cancer. So in our search of the solution or the driver for the rising incidence of early onset CRC, we have 2 considerations. So first, given that we are not sure whether the early onset CRC is a different entity compared to late onset CRC, the first question is whether established risk factor for colorectal cancer, mostly identified from study with a recruitment starting age 50 or 55 and average age of onset at 65. From those studies, the risk factors identified those studies, are they similarly associated with colorectal cancer under age 50? That's our first question. So the second question, which is very important, is that these potential risk factors also rise in parallel with early onset CRC and potentially, ideally, precede the rise of early onset CRC and providing a possible and feasible etiology window for them to play a role in early onset CRC. So those are the 2 considerations we have, and that's why we looked into obesity. So many of us may think that obesity were rising continuously in the past several decades. However, when you look into the enhanced data, actually obesity and extreme obesity started to rise since late 1970s and early 1980s. So actually 10 years before the rise of early onset CRC, presenting a possible etiology window for obesity to play a role. And many of us think that obesity is a strong risk factor for colorectal cancer. This is continuous updated report from project from the World Cancer Research Fund. It's a meta-analysis of comprehensive meta-analysis of existing studies, mostly derived from studies looking into average onset CRC. And basically, the two key messages here. So first, obesity is a strong risk factor for colon cancer, but not rectal cancer. And second, obesity is a strong risk factor for colorectal cancer among men, but not women. So we had the luxury to work with Nurses' Health Study 2, which is an ongoing cohort study which enrolled over 116,000 women starting 1989. And these nurses were aged from 25 to 42, representing an ideal cohort to look into risk factors for early onset CRC. As you recall from Dr. Siegel's analysis, that the cohort effects start to be observed after individual born in 1960s. So in this cohort, we have deep phenotype data, including self-reported lifestyle factors, medications, medical diagnoses that were later confirmed by physicians every 2 years. And also we have validated food frequency questionnaires every 4 years starting 1989. So the follow-up rate had been really high, more than 90% in every 2 years cycle. So in this cohort, we looked into current BMI and the risk of early onset colorectal cancer. We see a quite nice dose-response relationship with p-trend of 0.001. And in terms of 5 relative risk for each 5-unit increase in BMI, the associated increased risk is 20% for early onset CRC. So it's important to note that this association is very robust among individuals without family history of colorectal cancer, and also among individuals without endoscopy history in the past 10 years. So then we looked into current BMI risk of late onset CRC in this cohort. It's important to note in this cohort, most women are still at around age 55, so it's not really representing the data we have seen from existing studies. They are in menopausal and perimenopausal period, so the association can be very complicated. But again, we saw significant P4 heterogeneity compared to the association we saw for early onset CRC. So then we ask ourselves, where are the BMI come from? So we looked into BMI at age 18 in this cohort, and we did see that individuals who had a higher BMI at age 18 had higher risk of early onset CRC. And we also looked into weight change since age 18. And although the confidence interval are pretty wide, but it provides preliminary evidence, potential weight gain is also important in the process. So these are our findings in the space of obesity. Again, the case numbers are very small. We definitely look forward to additional validations. And we don't think obesity is the whole picture to contribute to the rise of early onset CRC, but at least it's part of the picture. So secondly, we looked into sedentary behavior. So existing evidence have shown that prolonged sedentary time, especially spent at TV watching, is associated with increased risk of obesity and diabetes. And even 2 hours per week additional TV watching time is associated with these outcomes. So this is a recent meta-analysis done by a European group showing that sedentary behavior, total sedentary behavior, especially those spent at TV watching, are associated with increase of all-cause mortality and also cancer mortality. And there are a few studies looking into colorectal cancer, including one of our own study. But in that study, we look into prolonged sitting with colorectal cancer among the general population, which is the average age onset is 65. And we did see a strong association among individuals with CRC under age 65. So we thought maybe we should look into this in nurses too. So that's the rationale of our study in sedentary behavior. But at the population level, we really need to understand the trend of sedentary behavior. There's no really good data, but this is kind of relative data showing that compared to 1965, TV watching time have been increased to at least 8 hours per week up to 2003. And what's after that? What's the trend after that? My group has recently published this paper in JAMA showing that in the United States, across all age group, even starting from very young age child, they watched at least 2 hours of TV. 60% of these kids watched at least 2 hours of TV per day. And it's really prevalent. Sedentary TV watching time is really prevalent in this population. Although the trend has been stable, we should realize that it's a really important health behavior that has not been really paid attention to. So if you look into this graph, actually around 40% of the population spend at least 3 hours more every day watching TV. So then we looked into sitting watching TV and video and the risk of early onset CRC. And we found that individuals who spend at least 2 hours per week had 67% increase of early onset CRC. And this association, again, is robust among individuals without family history of CRC and without endoscopy in the past 10 years. Interestingly, when we look into the colorectal cancer site by colon and rectal cancer, the association is much more stronger for rectal cancer. And in terms of mechanism, I think there are a lot of hypotheses. Again, one of the major hypotheses linking sedentary behavior, especially TV watching, with health outcome is that potentially you're consuming unhealthy diet. However, as I mentioned, in this cohort, we have deep phenotype self-reported validated food frequency questionnaire allow us to comprehensively adjust for unhealthy diet. And all these associations I've shown previously were independent of diet, physical activity, and obesity. So other mechanisms, including microbiomes, are involved in glucose homeostasis and potentially vitamin D, reduced vitamin D levels. So in summary, our findings provide a preliminary evidence that current obesity, potentially obesity in early adulthood and weight change since adulthood may be associated with risk of early onset CRC and maybe contribute to the rise of early onset CRC at the population level. And on the other hand, we also found that prolonged time spent sitting watching TV may be one of the risk factors that warrants attention and future validations. Thank you so much. I felt really lucky to work with to be trained and work with the Nurses Health Study colorectal cancer group, and especially Dr. Giovannucci, Dr. Chan, Dr. Vellet, and Dr. Cotis, who is currently my chief at WashU, who is also a leading investigator in cancer prevention. And most of all, I would like to thank participants of Nurses 2 for their dedicated contribution to the Nurses Health Study too. Thank you.